Galaxy Express 39 is the kind of sci-fi franchise which could only have come from 1970s Japan. Far enough into an age of genre savviness amongst the general public that it didn't need to explain space travel or alien planets, but long enough into the past that its sci-fi concepts are batshit crazy, since no one was as confident as they are now about what the next few hundred years of technological evolution might look like. On a structural level, it's basically a Star Wars-esque hero's journey space epic with a firm moral center, but it's also got a train that flies around the galaxy, and the main character is like a 10-year-old boy who's getting revenge on a planet full of robot people because they gave humans immortal bodies which turned them into monsters, and also they killed his mom. So it's got that going on, plus it's the kind of Japanese where the number 999 is read as 39, so there's that in there as well. Galaxy Express was penned by Leiji Matsumoto, more or less the face of anime and manga in the late 70s. This was for two reasons. Firstly, that his character designs were fucking beautiful. Some of the earliest manga characters to develop real cults of personality surrounding them, alongside Lupin III, Blackjack, and Golgo 13, joining the annals of great comic book characters with stories told about them to this day. And secondly, the iconography of Matsumoto's stories was simple yet striking. This man put a sunken World War II Navy ship into space and thereby created the visual shorthand which literally every relevant sci-fi adventure serial in anime history has copied wholesale since. You'll find shades of his space pirate Captain Harlock in just about every Cool Cat anime character that's come after him. The special quality of Matsumoto's work was that it was simultaneously broad and narratively driven enough to rope in mainstream audiences, but also appealed to weirdo sci-fi and military dorks like Hideaki Anno, who would go on to copy it for their entire careers. Hence, Matsumoto was simultaneously a mainstream Japanese cultural icon while also appealing to the kinds of people who would want to get into making art themselves. Unfortunately, if there's one thing that Japanese culture is great at, it's running their intellectual properties into the fucking ground with endless spin-offs, sequels, alternate universe takes, and reboots. In Leiji Matsumoto's case, aside from the fact that anime producers would do this to all of his properties in the world of adaptation, the guy made it even worse on himself through a strange case of self-flanderization. Not only did many of his stories take place in the same universe and function as spin-offs from one another, but he would also write his own sequels and alternate universe takes on his own stories, and then he'd create new stories which shared so many elements of the old ones as to be confusing to new viewers. It's for reasons like this that guys like Leiji Matsumoto and Go Nagai are barely talked about today, whereas guys who've been around for just as long like Hayao Miyazaki maintain strong marketing on films across all 50 years of their career, because they kept making new things, at least nominally. When a new Matsumoto-related thing comes out, fans will just look at it and think, yep, that sure is another Matsumoto thing, but it'll never be as iconic as the first time they saw a pirate ship in space. Non-fans, meanwhile, will just see it as this bizarrely dated sci-fi universe that they're not sure which part of they're supposed to watch first, hence why nothing related to Matsumoto in the last 20 years has ever crossed over into the kind of mainstream importance which he once had in the late 70s. But I digress, this is way too much beating up on a man who's done way more than enough for the world already. The iffiness of Matsumoto's franchise offshoots was already becoming established by the start of the 80s. After the monumental success of the original TV anime Space Battleship Yamato, which Matsumoto was heavily involved with, sequels and spin-off films were hastily tossed up one after another, with mixed reactions from audiences over some obviously rushed plot decisions leading to an entire film getting retconned. Captain Harlock was already receiving offshoot OVAs and movies after its own successful TV run, and in 1979, Galaxy Express 39 was stepping up to bat with its TV anime also getting underway, but its path to the cinema would be different from its forebears. See, Space Battleship Yamato's success had really begun when the TV series was compiled into a feature film, so it wasn't surprising that Galaxy Express would also receive a summary film. But this time, instead of just building a movie out of scenes from the show, which led the Yamato movie to be honestly kind of an ugly fucking mess, this time it would be recreated from the ground up under the helm of director Rintaro, who was fresh off the heels of directing the Captain Harlock TV series. Now, at this point in his career, Rintaro had mostly been responsible for directing straightforward manga adaptations, often of family shows. While some of these were at least pretty cool looking, it wouldn't be until the release of the Galaxy Express film that he would suddenly be recognized as one of the most visually creative directors in the medium. Wringing every ounce of emotional potential that he could out of each scene, Rintaro brought an artsy tinge to the sci-fi epic which turned it into a true cinematic experience, and it was successful and beloved beloved by all, so of course it needed to be ruined. You see, the only problem with releasing a Galaxy Express film in 1979 was that neither the manga nor its adaptation would be completed until 2 years later, so the movie just found a comfortable place to end and left itself open for a sequel. But of course, the hype wave wasn't going to wait around to see how the series was actually supposed to conclude before producing a second film. In the same year that the manga and TV series would be finished, a sequel movie, obviously written long before either was over, would also be released, Adieu Galaxy Express 39. This happens all the time in TV and movies. When a story gets ahead of its source material and it's time for the showrunners to start coming up with their own ideas about how to conclude things, the story usually turns into complete dog shit because these literally aren't the people who came up with it. Yes, they might have enough understanding of the original that they can capture some of its essence or to add their own unique mark to it that maybe an audience will appreciate, but they're just never going to get it in the same way that the original creator does, and will most likely change the nature of the story on a fundamental level. Occasionally this is for the best when the original creator is an insane person, but this is not such a case. The Galaxy Express manga and TV series had a perfectly respectable arc. Adieu Galaxy Express 39 is a great and fucking terrible film. All of the important characters return, but nothing is done with them emotionally whatsoever. The plot threads left open are hastily tied up in between long scenes depicting nothing of narrative significance. Frankly, it seems like the film was just planned around what kind of cool sequences Rintaro wanted to direct. Parts of it downright seem to be taking the piss out of the franchise, like when a toilet on the train empties into the main character's face as the only gag scene in the entire film. The reality is that this is an Arthouse film, which rests on the laurels of the beloved original storytelling to get viewers to stomach a movie with almost no plot. The driving force of the original film was Tetsuro's quest for vengeance and learning more about Maytel and Captain Harlock's histories. It was propped up by emotional scenes of Tetsuro's mother being killed, and then the shocking reveal of her body as a mantelpiece in an evil robot's mansion. In the sequel, the main driving force is that the 39 is literally just driving itself and no one knows where it's going, and Tetsuro is searching for Maytel because she told him to come and wasn't there when he got there. Propping this up is nothing but the sheer intrigue of Rintaro's aesthetic sensibilities and each artfully crafted sequence. It's hard to even really dislike the film just because it's so goddamn nice to look at most of the time, though I do take umbrage with the way that it tries to portray the ending as though it has the gravity of being the conclusion to an epic sci-fi narrative when the film has been nothing of the sort for the bulk of its runtime. Whatever charm the film has, little of it is related to the actual storytelling of the original, and the only reason I can imagine that as many audiences have accepted it as they did is because it at least stopped along the way to wrap up the basic questions of the original plot. But really, this stuff is just in the way when you look at the film from an art house perspective. Here we've got a movie full of character designs and iconography built for an adventure story, and instead it's being used for this kind of abstract representation of emotions which is really just limited by needing to conform to the rules of this universe. It may be cool to see this aesthetic taken to such an artistic extreme, but I think what most audiences were hoping for was probably something a bit less obtuse. The weirdest thing about all of this is that it somehow just became a thing that people do now. For some reason, 3 years later in 1984, Mamoru Oshii would decide to make one of the filler movies of his Rumiko Takahashi adaptation into a metatextual comedy art movie, pissing off Takahashi and launching Oshii into a lifetime of acclaim as one of anime's weirdest filmmakers. Then in 1987, Koichi Mashimo would turn a Dirty Pair movie into one of the most vaporwave album covers of all time, just because he could. Subsequently would begin the era of the weirdly badass movie tie-ins, as inventive Sakuga scenes began cropping up in Shin-chan and Doraemon filler movies, while up-and-coming legendary directors like Mamoru Hosoda helmed Digimon and One Piece spin-offs, or Takashi Koike was given the reins of the Lupin franchise and made it fresh and cool again. Rintaro, meanwhile, was basically off the deep end from this point on. This guy went straight from directing a mainstream Toei animation film about a popular Leiji Matsumoto sci-fi manga to generating nigh incomprehensible madness at Studio Madhouse, and then continuing to do so for the rest of his career. I don't know if it was that taste of creative freedom that changed the soul of the man, but he was definitely not going back. Even his adaptations were all going to be batshit crazy from that point on. And that concludes this weird tale of anime history. If you want more like this, then consider supporting me on Patreon and letting me know what kind of stories you're interested in. There you'll get access to tons of bonus content and a good hub for keeping track of all the stuff I put out across all of my channels. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.